Tim, Kent, welcome to the show. Could you just start off by telling us a bit about this mayor referendum? Because it's been many years in the making, including the former leader of the Lib Dems, who used to run Bristol City Council many moons ago, Barbara Jank, actually in the House of Lords, getting the ball rolling. And it's all happening in May. But we're not hearing hardly anything about it. We're not really reading much about it in the papers here. And we're not seeing much about it on the TV or the radio.
Yeah, well, back in 2012, when we were forced to hold the referendum by the government, Bristol was the only place to vote to have an elected mayor. It only just did it. It was a narrow margin, but fair enough, it was a margin in favour. Unfortunately, that was done under an act which never let you change your mind. So when Barbara Jank became a member of the House of Lords, something which we believe in abolishing, but still, she decided she wanted to do something useful there. So she moved an amendment to allow Bristol to have its right to say, and in the end, the government accepted that it was an anomaly, which was not fair, and moved that. And that basically means once every 10 years, you are allowed to, if you wish, hold another referendum to have your say on how you govern your city or your council, and that's what we're going to do.
Well, it's bizarre, isn't it, that something like this should have to happen through the House of Lords, which is an ancient institution of appointees, and the Commons are not interested.
Well, yeah, I mean, to be fair to the House of Lords, often they do bring forward sensible amendments. Personally, I don't believe in an anachronistic appointed chamber, but those who are there do try to perform their role, and that's what Barbara did. She brought forward an amendment to another local government bill, I think one creating regional mayors, so it was coherent to what was being discussed.
But surely you're like me, you would question the process which has led to those who are selected to stand to be MPs, because we seem to have a pretty shoddy standard actually right now. I mean, certainly it's declined since I've been doing journalism over the 30 years. These MPs question things far less, and we're even in the situation now where every single MP is behind the Ukraine stuff. Almost all the MPs are behind the government. I mean, we've got a bizarre situation with the Labour opposition is almost patting the Tories on the back and saying, can't we do a bit more?
Well, to deal with your point about the quality of MPs, I think you need to look at the system of voting. You have a system which basically guarantees 60 to 70% of seats being safe seats. Those MPs don't need to work to be re-elected. They're automatically re-elected. And that's a significant problem.
So it doesn't matter who's standing, so long as it's a particular party, they'll get in.
Exactly. You could have literally a pig standing in certain seats that had a blue rosette on, people will go out and vote for it. And it might bring a little bit more intelligence than perhaps your average blue rosetted MP.
Now, I know this is something Martin is quite concerned about too. Even as a Labour Party member, he thinks the electoral system, Martin, don't you, is completely it's fit for the dustbin.
Well, I think it is. I mean, I think a lot of the trouble we've had in this country over the last 20 or 30 years is because a minority have been able to rig the system to get what they want. And of course, it's led to all sorts of very poor decisions. But
the point here, Tim, is that the mayor is not done on the first past the post system, is it? As you know, I believe is it a single transferable? No, it's you get a second preference as well. So whoever you're getting two choices, and so the idea is that if it looks as if it's split, then those second choices really count.
Yeah, it's a slightly strange system. It is a fairer system. It is not just the directly elected mayors that are elected under that, but police and crime commissioners are elected using that system as well. I think sometimes having a better system of voting doesn't necessarily justify a very bad role, though. And the reality is, this isn't about the individual. This isn't about Marvin Rees, who blocks many, many people on Twitter because he doesn't like what they say. What this is about is the fact that the role was written incorrectly in legislation to begin with. There is not the accountability. There is not the sharing of power. There is not the ability to be able to democratically bring a mayor to account, apart from once every 4 years when you get to vote. Otherwise, the mayor is left with unfettered power. It is not like mayors in other countries.
Well, even not like the US, because we keep saying, well, actually, no, really.
No, in the US, the council often has substantially more power. And actually, mayors have to often negotiate with their council. It is a far more equal division of power. It is different from city to city, state to state in the US, but if you also take France and many other countries with mayors, there's far more checks and balances built within the system. When they actually built this system, they completely forgot about checks and balances and gave all of the power of basically the legislative, the council, over to the executive without a checks and balances.
Can you take us through, because we've had a bit of a dispute over the last month or so, a couple of months, over the budget and the way that the city council actually decided that they didn't like the budget that Marvin Rees was presenting. He's supposed to stand there, say, I've got a fantastic budget, and everyone's supposed to just tick it off, but that didn't happen, did it?
Well, at the budget meeting, and not surprising, his budget didn't receive overwhelming support. I mean, no attempt was done to reach out to groups in advance to try to bring them on board. So, as usual, groups ran amendments, and those amendments were put to the vote. Some passed, some fell. Different groups voted in different ways, and individual councillors in certain groups voted in different ways. And then when we got to the end of the meeting, where we expected the amendments that had been voted through to become part of the budget, the meeting was suddenly ended and there was no final vote. And the mayor, in fact, invoked a power which meant that he could pull us all back in again about 2 or 3 weeks later. And this time, to amend his budget, we needed 2/3 of the vote. He only needed 1/3 to win.
And so what happened?
Well, during that time, what he did was he instead approached the Green Party to do a deal, and that fell apart. So he approached the Conservative Party to do a deal. To be fair to the Conservatives, they got a very good deal out of him. And when it came to the meeting, they voted together. So an unamended budget was passed, but only mostly with Conservative amendments, and I think one Green one survived.
Well, isn't this funny that the Tories and Labour in Bristol are now sort of in cahoots, because these are the two traditional parties that have benefited so much from first past the post.
And of course, when I was first elected, they were very old allies. It's only actually in recent years the Conservatives had fallen out of love with the Labour Party in Bristol. Many years ago, of course, the Conservatives even voted Labour into office back in 2007 to take over the council. So we have seen maybe that realignment in Bristol politics, and that will seem strange to listeners, but strange things happen in the council house. But end of the day, none of that particularly matters, because the mayor has so much power. What councillors want to do, and if they want to reflect the views of their community, none of that is listened to. Only the mayor's voice has power.
Well, don't you feel, as a councillor, like just walking away, because most of what you do is banging your head against a brick wall?
Yeah, but if we walked away, who would be there to lead the fight? Who would be there to expose Bristol Energy? Who would be there to say to the mayor, no, what you do is going too far? Who would be there to stand up over the issue of the arena? I mean, over the years, we have stood up and vocalised the views of our residents. The mayor has continuously ignored those. Well, May the 5th, residents now get choice. Now, they can choose to continue with the system. For some, they may be happy with that system. Maybe they like the idea of just one person having all the power and not being accountable to them, in which case that's fine. They can vote to keep the mayor, or they can vote to return the council to a modern committee system.
But the mayor has the business community behind him, and presumably quite a lot of cash.
He does have the business community behind him. Well, at least some of the business community, not all of it. He particularly has the business community, of course, that doesn't live in Bristol. So we must remember, when we hear these businessmen telling us how grateful we should be that we've got a mayor, they don't seem to like Bristol enough to actually live in Bristol.
Well, what makes you say that? Surely many of I think it was Business West was one of the people that put in a statement in favour of the mayor, or somebody representing them anyway, at the council meeting where this was voted on and decided to have a referendum. Business West is all over. Surely it's not outside the city.
Well, as you would say that's strange, but Business West is actually based in Abbottsley in North Somerset, not in Bristol at all. And maybe Business West should show their commitment to our city by selling off their home in Abbottsley and actually investing here in Bristol.
Well, yeah, but I mean, sure, the members are all over the place, aren't they? They're not, even though their headquarters is there. That's just a quirk that it's out of the city.
Well, certainly one of the key leaders who signed that letter does not live in Bristol.
Martin, this is going to be an important vote for the city, and it's really, I mean, it seems to me that it hasn't been much of a campaign going on. I would like to see more, in our press, etc. But the chances are that actually very few people will vote. We don't have local elections this year, do we? We don't have people voting for their councillors, people like Tim. And so it's just going to be a vote. We don't have the police commissioner elections either. So it's just going to be a vote on this. And are people actually going to turn out and vote? Do they care?
I think that's the key point. I think I tend to think that it's likely that the mayor system will be overturned because the people who don't want it are the people who are motivated to go and vote. But on the other hand, what may well happen is you get a fairly low turnout because there aren't any elections to the council. And then, you know, don't forget when the mayoral system was originally imposed, it was a very poor turnout and a very small vote. And I'm afraid it's on these little imponderable shifts in public opinion of the minority that will participate that it will be decided.
But surely most people will make their decision based on what they read in the press, etc., and maybe adverts. And the pro-mayor group are by far the more minted of the two.
I think the problem for both sides in this is that the population are not engaged in it, and that therefore, then, if there were local elections at the same time, you might expect a reasonable turnout in the 30 to 40% mark. But if it's significantly less than that, and I suspect it may be, you're still going to have people saying, well, that's not really, you know, a ringing endorsement of going back to the old system.
It's frustrating for people like you and I, Tim, that Martin may well be right, people are not engaged. What would you say to somebody that was saying, well, what's the point in me voting?
Well, I'd say if you want to be able to complain about a system, you've got to go out there and have your voice. You've got to go and vote. Then you've got the right to complain. Otherwise, you're basically giving up your right to complain.
Well, people will say, well, the City Council does less and less. Its budget is going down all the time. Why do I need to even bother with the City Council?
I mean, the council money is constrained, but let's remember it still has a gross budget of over £1 billion a year. I mean, it is a substantial amount of money, and there are big decisions that are still made at the council. Admittedly, that government has stripped away a lot of our role regarding education. There is now more powers that have gone over to the West of England Combined Authority. But it's also up to us in local government to campaign to bring more power back to local government. And I think to do that, we need also our electorate to be engaged and trusting in their politicians. It's interesting you say about a low turnout. I think you're right. It probably will be low, and that we do not want. We want as many people to go and vote one way or the other. But I did a survey recently in our community, not on this at all, it was on a traffic issue, but we asked the question, are you likely to go and vote? And over 3/4 of the 350 people who replied to this survey about traffic, nothing to do with this issue, said they were definitely going to go and vote.
Maybe we should have a referendum on traffic instead, and people might vote.
But the bad news for the pro-mayor campaign, 4% of them said they wanted to vote to keep the mayor. The other 96% didn't say that.
Okay, well, I mean, I can remember from years ago, people trying to get people politically engaged in the trade unions. There was a meeting about the car parking. Everyone was there. A lot of the other meetings, people were, oh, well, you know, just let them get on with it.
Perhaps if we said the referendum was a referendum on car parking, we'd have 100% turnout.
Well, maybe it is. Maybe it is, because car parking is becoming an increasing role of the City Council, and they're getting much, more and more revenue all the time from it, aren't they?
Well, it is obviously a big revenue spinner of the council. But
it's going up, is what I'm saying.
It is going up. There is actually a strange legal cap within local government finance. You can actually make so much from car parking because the transport account is ring-fenced and you're not actually legally allowed to make a profit out of it.
Wow. Well, I'm amazed by that. Because
I'm amazed as well. They must be very close to the limit.
They are. I bet they are, because the parking fees are astronomical, and they're very, very... I mean, for example, a couple of occasions where I've got tickets where I shouldn't have been ticketed, for example, wrong time of day or something, they're still trying to pursue them through the courts.
I should clarify that's only on-street car parking there, but not off-street car parking.
No, that's right, on-street parking, because it's their street, and they seem to be...
the bus fines, the bus lane fines are all included in that. So yeah, it must be a hard job being an accountant to make those columns add up.
So how's things going generally with spending in the City Council? Because obviously with all it's really hit ever since 2008, the bailouts, the financial crisis, that has started really restraining what City Councils can do, Tim, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, austerity hit the council 2008, 2009. That was the first year where we've had it. We've sort of pretty much suffered every single year that there's never enough money to meet our commitments. And often what you're asked to do by government increases, the money flow does not increase. Our local government has made substantial savings, really reduced its workforce, and that has been down to hard work of officers and politicians of all colours to try to achieve that. I think what local government has shown to national government is we're a lot more efficient than you. Because I'm afraid national government has not been making anywhere near the same amount of savings. Unfortunately, this is going to continue, especially post-COVID, and then added to which, what has not helped the council, of course, has been some of the massive financial disasters of the mayor.
Which are?
Well, to name one, although I can name several if you want, Bristol Energy. So Bristol Energy, that's £50 million down the pan just to begin with.
Now, that was started by the previous mayor, though, wasn't it?
It was started by the previous mayor, and he had committed just over £1 million before Marvin took power. So every penny after that is all down to the current mayor.
Okay, other wastes of money, because this is quite well known. The Bristol Energy here in Bristol.
Let's go on to the next one then.
Yeah.
So next we have is the arena. So £12 million was spent preparing the arena site. Now some of that was spent before Marvin Rees took office, but in reality millions of pounds were spent after he took office, even though he realised he always intended to scrap the arena. But he took a couple of years to make that decision, and millions of pounds
when
later...
you say he already had decided,
Yeah.
how do you know that? Because Marvin was saying it was the decision wasn't just his. He was going to be listening to all sorts of people and see what to do.
I think that in itself was the giveaway. I think that the lack of being very specific in the language. When a politician starts talking around something, and someone who's worked in politics, I've seen this myself, that normally means there's something they don't want to tell you.
Who is this YTL company that's going to be building the arena apparently up at Filton, who I understand is chaired by one of these merchant venturers, this old slave trading society that seem to own the city?
Yeah, well, YTL are an Asian international company that owns many, many things, but one of the things they own is Wessex Water. So that's their interest in this area. And of course,
I think they've just sold it. Or
they may have, yes.
Yeah.
And then from that, they bought the old airfield site up in North Bristol, and of course they had the hangar there. And they have managed to convince. I've got to say, it wasn't a new idea for an arena to go there. I myself heard that idea 8 years ago.
And me, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about the old Brabazon hangar, but certainly they were talking about that.
It was that hangar I was being talked about.
But what about these merchant venturers? We also heard there was they played a role in the toppling of Edward Colston's statue, which was news that reverberated around the world. Quite amazing, really, all from here in Bristol, because Colston was himself a merchant venturer originally, and a slave trader. This organisation now is pretty much unaccountable. They have enormous wealth. We don't know exactly how much, though, because it's all covered they're constituted under a royal charter, which means only the Privy Council can scrutinise their finances. No journalists can, and no councillors in the city.
Yeah, and of course they also have other powers, such as over the Downs. So the Downs Act actually means it's sort of half owned and half... the merchant venturers have half the membership on the Downs Committee. And I think perhaps in a modern city, in a modern time, that needs to now be questioned, whether or not a private organisation should have such influence.
Yeah, it's an interesting committee. It's one of those that, it's where the owners of the city meet the elected councillors of the city. And I can remember, this is, must be 3 or 4 years ago now, chatting to one of the Bristol Post reporters who was had been earlier that day reporting on the Downs Committee. And they told me, well, we couldn't start because the new chair, who was from the merchant venturers, wouldn't let me record the meeting, and so we had to have a break for 30 minutes or so while various lawyers talked to other lawyers about whether the reporter was allowed to record the meeting, and then half an hour later the meeting began, and then she was allowed to record the meeting. But even after the objection of the chair then said, "Oh, sorry, I must have had some wrong legal advice, and you can record the meeting." So actually, it is a public meeting. The idea that you can't record these things, this is a kind of business mentality that's creeping into local government.
Yeah, although the rules of the council up till about 10 years ago were that you were not allowed to record anything. I remember myself getting berated once when I tried to record somebody speaking in the council by the Lord Mayor, who said, "What's that idiot doing there?" So, it all sort of changed about 10 years ago as we brought in video recording. And then I think
live streaming.
Live streaming.
If
these
people
days
are really bored, they can watch it live streaming.
At one time, that used to be the rule. You were not allowed to record anything, and you really did need to be good at your shorthand to have any chance of getting down what people said.
Wow, crazy. Anyway, welcome to the 21st century. In the Bristol Post this week, Bristol's elected mayor system has been slammed as undemocratic. In a survey, fewer than 10 people said the city, I think this is what you were talking about, Tim, has benefited from having an elected mayor. The vast majority of Bristol Live readers who responded to our survey on the mayoral referendum said they don't think Bristol should keep the elected mayor system. Of the 126 responses received, 119 or 94.4% said they didn't think the city council should continue having an elected mayor. Well, that's a pretty good indication that maybe we will not be having a mayor. So how would it all work? Does Marvin Rees, the current incumbent mayor, you know what, this would explain, if the powers that be have got wind that the mayor is going out, this might be why we've had so many controversial planning decisions and development decisions made by the land speculators thinking, well, actually we better get these these planning applications in because in a couple of years' time we won't be able to do that necessarily.
So to be clear, on May the 5th everyone will get to vote and it will just be whoever gets the most votes, that system will win, but that is not brought in straight away. So it doesn't actually get brought in until 2024. The mayor does get to see out their term of office. So this won't be a shortcut for people to get rid of a mayor they might not like. That's not what's being decided here. So people need to go vote on May the 5th, choose the system they want to choose. Obviously, I'm advocating very strongly for scrap the mayor. And I'm out campaigning now with that campaign. Over the next 6 weeks, we'll be doing all we can to encourage people to go and vote and hopefully go vote for scrap the mayor, but yes, use their right to vote.
Okay, so I think it's quite important we have to try and drag somebody in who likes the mayor, thinks it's a great idea. Is it fair to say there's actually not that many voices saying that, although the ones that are quite powerful people?
I think what we now see come out in the media are the great and the good. These are the people who enjoy their privileged access to the mayor. They want to keep that privileged access.
And to the press.
Yeah, and to the press. So there's a few individuals who have privileged access in this city, and the rest are cut out. So that's the decision people get to make on May the 5th. Do they want to keep in place a system which gives the few privileged access, or do they want a fairer system where everyone's got an equal voice?
One person who responded to the survey said the present mayor has become dictatorial. He also lost £50 million on his power company. The previous one was a bit also arrogant, wasting money on street signs. Well, that was the previous mayor, George Ferguson. What's his views? I think he's actually rather likes the idea of getting rid of the mayor too, doesn't he, even though he was mayor himself?
George Ferguson, who helped lead the campaign to have a mayor, is now helping lead the campaign to abolish the role of mayor. But he has a very particular viewpoint, and on this I agree with him as well, and that is we have another mayor, and we have the mayor he always wanted us to have. That's the new regional metro mayor. He always felt Bristol should have a more powerful voice on the national and international stadium to be able to get out there and speak up for Bristol.
Well, this is what Marvin Rees, the city council mayor, says. He says, I'm in touch with all these mayors from all around the world. In fact, he's part of a world parliament of mayors.
Yes, I mean...
He invites them all to Bristol.
He's trying to hold on to that. And now, of course, mayors from across the world are very confused when they phone Bristol, because do they get Marvin or do they get Dan? And they spend the first 10 minutes of every phone call trying to work out who they're speaking to. Let's simplify that. Just make it one mayor they have to speak to, not two, because we are really confusing the international world.
Well, how did that come about, Tim?
Well, that came about because, as usual, there's no competence in government.
You said it. I think it's also partly because Bristol was the city that it is always within the city boundaries likely to elect a left-wing mayor. Most large cities do elect left-wing mayors, and so the metro mayor was brought in order to widen the constituency out to those lovely leafy suburbs all around, so they can have a Tory mayor. instead.
You could very well be right in that, but clearly whoever came up with that plan, it slightly backfired.
It did, didn't it? Because we got Dan Norris, who's a Labour Metro Mayor as well. So, I mean, Martin, it's very easy for people listening to Tim, watching this experience of having a mayor, not having a mayor, deciding maybe we don't want one, shilly-shallying, to just, to criticise politicians as absolutely incompetent.
Well, what it is it's bodging along. The whole idea of having mayors was just something on the back of a fag packet thought up by David Cameron.
And Nick Clegg, actually, I do believe. Nick Clegg was involved in all this, wasn't he, Tim?
We didn't think it up. The Conservatives very much forced this through as part of their agreement in the coalition.
Wasn't it called the City Deal when he came to Bristol and he said, we've got a great new City Deal. Here's Nick Clegg. My name's Nick Clegg. I'm a Liberal Democrat.
City deals were very much our part, and the Tories forced on the mayors as part of that. We did lots of bad things in coalition. This is one I certainly think is probably up there, but it wouldn't be on the top of my list.
Do you think the Lib Dems have in any way recovered from that appalling little marriage with the Conservative Party, when actually people have argued that Nick Clegg could have done deals with Labour instead and kept credibility? I mean, you do look at the Tories and wonder if they're just running the show and they always will get their way because they happen to be so powerful financially. But I mean, will your party recover from that? Has it recovered from that?
Do I think it's recovered from it? No. Do I think we have much of a choice? No. I mean, at the time, we all recall, really, there was no deal on the table with Labour. Labour MPs were lining up in the media to say they'd rather be struck down by lightning than form a government with the Liberal Democrats. So at the time, there was a financial crisis. Everyone wanted a stable government. Has that hurt us? Yes. Did we make mistakes in government? Yes. And I think naturally, sometimes as the third party, you're often sometimes the party of protest. That very much meant we weren't the party of protest, and we lost many of those votes. And clearly, we lost also votes from people of the left who felt that we had not fulfilled what they had hoped. I think that is changing. It's slow. But we have seen last year 2 by-elections. We won off the Conservatives. I think what we've demonstrated in certain parts of this country, only the Liberal Democrats can beat the Conservatives. There are other parts of the country where, to be honest, we don't have much chance. But in certain parts, we are the opposition to the Conservatives, and we showed that last year.
You did. Martin, is that your reading of the Miliband election? When was it, 2015? No, 2010. When the Lib Dems did the deal with the Tories, that they couldn't do a deal with Labour?
Well, I think it was very difficult to make the numbers add up. You could have had a minority Labour government with, supply and support from the Liberal Democrats, which happened in the 70s. I think it was a very poor decision by the Liberal Democrats from their own point of view, because a lot of people vote Liberal Democrat in certain parts of the country because they are the main opposition to the Tories. So in those areas, which are sort of rural areas, those people, like my father, for example, was a Liberal Democrat councillor, was just appalled. I mean, because it's like you've just sold the farm there. And, of course, that cost you a lot. And it was all really on the basis that there was going to be a referendum on a single transferable vote.
Oh, yes.
Which, of course, makes me despair, because it means that the Tories can then claim they've shot that fox for the next generation, which, of course, isn't the case, because the British state is a creaking Heath Robinson contraption, barely held together. We've got all sorts of different elections under different kinds of electoral systems. In Northern Ireland, for example, they have a d'Hondt system for the Assembly. Westminster elections are first past the post, and it's all. And what happens is we just tack another little bit on and think that we can somehow. I mean, if we get back to having a committee system in Bristol, it'll all be elected under first past the post, so the councillors won't necessarily be representative of the people in the community and so on. I mean, if you just have to look across the Channel or anywhere in Northern Europe, and you will see that everybody else just thinks it's batty the way we do stuff, and it is.
But is there, I mean, you're talking about in a generation. I mean, I look at the Labour Party and I think, well, Corbyn was the Labour Party's first chance in a generation to actually be the Labour Party. It's had these Blairites, now Starmerites, that are really representing the city, the Tory party. running the show now. And so, as the Labour, are we not going to see anything much from Labour in the next generation, Martin?
Well, I despair, because I spoke to Jeremy Corbyn in a meeting when he was first running for Labour leader. I said, will you not commit to PR? Because this is exactly what the Labour left in New Zealand did in the 1980s. They just did it, and it worked. And I phoned Fangam Debonair to discuss who to vote for in the last leadership election. And I said, if Starmer commits to PR, then he's got my vote. But they won't do it.
So just as a final comment, Tim, I wonder if you could tell us about the what you make of the planning of the Western Harbour. This is this new scheme in the west of the city, which apparently is, I think there's a news story came out just a couple of weeks ago about it, saying that, I'm just going to pull the headline up here, that the presentation of the new plans for the Western Harbour, because the previous ones were so controversial, basically bulldozing parts of the area, getting rid of important roads, putting new roads in. I mean, there doesn't seem to be much in the way of consultation, but this one, it says it had children's drawings and little else. And this is an enormously important part of the city, right underneath what everyone knows as the Clifton Suspension Bridge, and it's all going to be redesigned, mostly with these kind of large residential buildings, completely changed, and the locals hardly consulted.
I believe at the heart of the consultation was actually a poem written by the city poet, the mayor's poet. Unfortunately, the mayor's poet was not so happy when he discovered that they had changed his poem when they published it in the consultation document. So the whole consultation document...
So they altered the words or something?
They altered a phrase within it. They also altered... apparently it was supposed to have been done in a certain way, and it wasn't done the way he liked. He had no idea that this was being done.
So they bowdlerised it.
So I think that pretty much tells you the level of competence at this consultation. And the mayor seems to have gone from one extreme to another. So there's
very arrogant. This is incredibly arrogant.
There was a bunch of secret plans which you weren't allowed to see apart from the plan he wanted you to see. Now, what you're basically just not allowed to see anything at all, apart from a few pretty words and pretty drawings. There's nothing there. There's nothing there talking about the road network, the detail, the hardcore detail that people would really like to discuss is not there. Now, my community, having gone through this ourselves with Hengrove Park, we're aware that the council often do what it wants to do and would ignore you as a community. It'd be really nice for once they actually engage with the community. And planning's always difficult because there's always going to be a compromise. There's always going to be some people who don't want to see anything there, and there'll be others willing, who want to get as much housing as possible. But if you work with people, you can get a majority to agree. We did in Hengrove and Whitchurch Park. We actually ran a referendum on a neighbourhood plan, and we got over 75% of people to agree to build over half of our park. The problem is the council then went and took 2/3 of the park instead.
The young Bristolians, we've got a picture in here in the article here, taking part in a Shape My City session in partnership. There's a whole load of kids with high-vis jackets on as part of the Western Harbour consultation project. So, of course, the council will say, well, we've run a consultation on it, Tim.
Yeah. I think the word there was con, wasn't it?
So who is actually making these plans? Because if they're running a consultation on something they've already decided, it does seem like a bit of an insult to the residents.
Well, what we had is, let's be honest, we had a very particular situation last year. We had something called an election, and the mayor needed to get re-elected. So let's remember, Western Harbour side suddenly went by the wayside. Brislington Meadows.
It all got forgotten about for a while.
A big announcement. Oh, that's it. The link road, the road in along the A4 and the Callington Link Road suddenly was not going to be a road at all. Now the elections have gone, so it's back to business as usual in a mayoral authority. Do as you're told.
Well, it's pretty shocking, and of course, I think the people who've actually drawn these plans up for these houses are property speculators themselves, rather than any local people. Martin,
quite likely, and it may well be, as things get fairly iffy on the international economic front, that none of it will get built in the end anyway.
So on that, what do you think is going to be the effect of this international stuff on just generally? Because we've been talking a lot about cost of living, all that sort of thing. What's going to be the effect of it on us? I'm not, obviously these sanctions, etc., directed at Putin and Russia. What's going to be the effect here?
Well, the obvious knock-on effect, just to put it in a nutshell, is there's going to be a major recession in Europe, and Bristol will be part of that.
Well, we don't buy anything from Russia, do we?
No, it's not a question of buying things from Russia. We do, in fact, buy things from Russia, but it's a knock-on effect. Yeah, the Deutsche Bank, for example, is massively exposed to Russia, and if the Russians don't pay what they owe Deutsche Bank could collapse unless Rishi Sunak can find some money behind the sofa to bail them out. We're going to go back to a 2008 scenario. That's probably most likely.
There's actually something far bigger than that, and that is 40% of the world's Xeon comes from mostly Ukraine and partly Russia.
What?
I think it's Xeon, the gas.
Oh, Xenon.
Yeah. And that's used in the manufacture of computer chips.
Yeah.
Oh. And computer chips are already in very short supply. Yeah. And what has been decided is priority one for the use of all computer chips is for government projects. What are government projects? Weapon systems. Yeah. What are being used at the moment in extreme amounts, and governments are just about to put hundreds of billions of pounds of orders in for? Weapon systems.
Well, they're hoping that they can use this military Keynesianism, if you like, to fend off what's going to happen. But the possibility here is that the dollar stops being the world's reserve currency, and that has big implications for where the United States operates.
And unfortunately, we're probably going to see a massive shortage of computer chips. And these days, computer chips are in absolutely everything. So it's going to cause a real hit to the economy if this is not resolved.
Including 737s, and we'll be hearing about that a little bit later on, these aircraft that came down. Lots of computer chips in there. Anyway, Tim Kent, Lib Dem councillor for Hengrove and Whitchurch Park, thanks very much for being with us. And we'll go now to listen to, we'll be doing this every week. We've got two more to go. The interview with Julian Assange from 2011, done by Laura Smith from RT. And I just think it's the reason we're doing this week is, you may not know, but it wasn't on the news. I actually lost a bet saying they will put it on the news. Julian Assange got married this week, 2:00 on Wednesday. And anyway, let's have a listen back 11 years to when he was in his heyday, before he was under house arrest, and before he was in Belmarsh prison, being incarcerated by the British government.
Let's talk a little bit about you and what you're going through at the moment. You are currently fighting extradition to Sweden. What are your fears should you be extradited there?
The problem is in two parts. The United States is trying to get up an extradition case for me to the United States. Just today we see a new subpoena coming out of the secret grand jury that is operating in Alexandria, Virginia. It is trying to get up this espionage case against us. It is building that case, and in whatever country I am in, once it decides to indict,